Started with this information meeting. The committee has worked very diligently in getting the information together to share with you to make the best choice we can. We want to share that with you. And our challenge is that we think the church has a lot of future. And we want that future to continue. And with the benefits that we can get from these grants at this time, we think it's an excellent time to do something for our future. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Patrick and Carl pretty well. Greg's here, Kyle's here, Dan's here. Jim's, I'm sure, listening with us at nursing home, so he's part of it as well, along with Jeff. So from that, I'll turn it over to Patrick, and we'll continue.
Good morning, everybody. We'll try and get everybody to lunch at some point here. One thing I was going to mention too, this is a question informational session, so as you guys have questions, you can kind of put them. Probably makes sense to wait until the end of this first section. This is going to provide all the information, all the research and things that we've done, hopefully in a good format for you guys to see. Greg did want me to mention, we've got a new hanging mic back there, so instead of us having to run a mic to you for questions like we used to do, you should be okay just to kind of ask your questions when that comes up. He did say that when that is on, though, you will be able to hear like your mumblings and all the things saying in the background. So if you're grumbling about us, we'll have it on the recording. So just so you know. All right, so let's get this thing going. And I want to give a big thanks to Carl. He put this entire presentation together that sums up everything kind of that we've done over the past however many months we've been doing this at this point. So the first thing we want to talk about is the different services we currently have. So right now we've technically got 3 different bills that we're getting from Centerpoint. We've got the one for the garage down the way, we've got one for the parsonage, and then one for the church itself, the sanctuary and the buildings there. So one thing I want to mention, aside from doing this project in general, we want to try and combine all that because we're actually getting charged multiple charges for each of those services. I think it's the service charge, distribution charges, things like that. So regardless of whether this project goes through, we'll end up probably trying to combine all that into one as we get a contractor out. But we did want to mention that because we looked at different options for, do we just want to do the sanctuary, do we want to do the sanctuary, parsonage, garage, all that. So that'll kind of come up. But you can kind of see from the image, we've got all these different poles, 3 different services right now, 3 different rates. So these are the things we looked at, the service to the church and the Sunday school hall, service to the parsonage, and then we looked at billings for each of those, the service to the garage and the playground. And I am actually having a hard time reading some of that. Again, this includes multiple charges. We've got service charges for each of these, but we individually looked at them to figure out usage and how much we wanted to cover and what we decided to cover. And this does have the electrical data. Before I go too far, one thing the committee did determine is that we really don't think it's worthwhile trying to pull the garage piece into this bucket because it's easier to connect the parsonage and the sanctuary and the church and all that. The garage wasn't a ton of usage, but it was going to be a lot of additional costs and things to try and pull it in, and it just wasn't going to be worth it trying to wrap it into this project. So we set that aside at one point. You can jump in whenever. Go ahead.
Just make kind of a point of this. One of the things we looked at early is what you see there. And the service to the Sunday school hall and church, we've got a regular service charge. We got usage charge, which for the church is like 13.5 cents a kilowatt hour. But we also get a demand charge, and a lot of people just have residential servers don't understand what the demand charge is, but some of the farmers that's got larger servers do. We get charged $5.11 for the highest 15-minute demand that the church uses. So if we got 30 kW hooked up, we pay $150 demand charge on top of our usage charge. So then the parsonage is on a standard residential rate like everybody's got here, and we pay basically 17 cents a kilowatt hour. But because of a quirk with the service to the church, we also get charged a pole charge for an estimated demand on the parsonage. So we're getting charged, really getting a double dip on the parsonage. We're paying the higher rate, plus we're paying $5.11 a kilowatt demand on the church's bill, which has added about 50-something dollars a month to the church's bill. And then our third one we got is the services to the playground down there. That's a small general service, so all three of them, we've got 3 meters, and every meter's on a different rate. So what we looked at, we go to that next one.
Yeah.
I give you an example. At the top there is the church. And the church, basically, you see the service charge, our KW, kilowatt hour usage, what the average kilowatt hour point, and what our demand, and that's a metered demand for the church. So the average monthly has been 30 kilowatts per 15-minute period is what we've been getting charged for, except you go down to the next one, where's the parsonage, no, I'm sorry.
Carry on.
Go to the next one there where it gives you the parsonage. It goes through there, and we've been averaging adding 10.6 kilowatt demand onto the church bill. So at $5.11, you can see that's $54 a month that's added to the church bill. So for the church, we're paying total like $6,950 a month or a year. The parsonage is costing us $2,243 a year, and the one down there for the garage is $80 bucks a month. But it's so far away, it's not practical to try to tie those together. So we looked at maybe tying the parsonage and the church together. And if we did that without even considering solar, we could save $700 a year on our bill.
Yeah, and that goes back to my point of, we would probably recommend doing that regardless of if we move forward with solar, because the savings is just gonna be there once we figure out how to get that done.
And then if something happens that we can't, we can always revert back to just the church, which is a smaller savings, but it's still a saving. Okay.
All right.
Now that just gives you a general how our system's gonna work. And, you know, we got the church, we got our solar panels. When we're not using all we use, we put it back on to the grid. But for that, CenterPoint gives us a credit of like 7 cents a kilowatt hour. So that credit will be applied back to future bills. But there in the middle where you see then when we're not producing enough to take care of the service for the church, we're taking back off the grid. Well, when we take it back off the grid, they're charging us 14 cents a kilowatt hour. So if we had a system that was too big and always produced more than what we need, we'd really have to get a bigger truck, because we're only getting like 6 cents for our kilowatts, and they're charging us another 14 back the other way. So it's really not good sense to do that.
Yeah.
And of course at night, you know, we're taking everything off the grid. So.
And I'll make a quick point for that too. So because of this factor right here, the committee basically chose to look at a system that generated essentially just over what we need instead of one that was producing a lot more, because there's just not a lot of benefit to producing a really large system. Like, we could support a larger system here with the roof space, you know, with the locations we have, we could do that. But based on the economics, it just doesn't make sense to do that. We're really aiming to produce what the church needs a little bit more in case we have increased usage in future years. And so as we get to the showing what the system looked like, that's why we picked what we did. And the original bids we got way back when were for a larger system. Like, I think it was as much as could be produced. We cut that back to a smaller system. Okay.
Now there we just compared the two. What if we did just the church, we got 25.2 kilowatt system would take care of the church. Going over, if we do the church and the parsonage, that would go up to 33.2 kilowatts. So increasing just our solar capacity by 32% to include the parsonage as well, we can see a savings increase of 43%. So that's another reason we looked at combining the two, so that, could increase our savings like that.
Yeah, and ultimately, the final bids we sent to the contractors was that second one. It was the church and the parsonage combined. So that is the system that we sent and the requirements we sent to them to get us bids back. Good.
Having just compared the bid, we got two valid bids, I'll call it, for this system. A third bidder never did respond to us, so we got bidder number one there, and you can see the size of the wattage is the same on both of them. Both of them estimated about the same kilowatt hours per year that it would generate, and depends on what they're using. They come out close, but they won't ever be the same. And both of them, we got 83 panels, and then the panels are 400 watts each, and the converters, what we did on that, we actually increased one converter to bidder number one, because he bid us with 3 converters, which would have worked, but 4 gives us a little more capacity, and we like theirs, so we added a 4th to his bid, and the total price then was, he quoted us with $87,820, and that installed cost per watt down there, it's got $264.5 per watt. We just done that so we could compare apples to apples, so we know what we're paying per watt of installed wattage. But with the credits we're gonna get, it looks like that net cost of a roof-mounted system would cost $52,692 on that. And then bidder number 2, we did the same thing, went through it, except we actually decreased his price, because if he's got roof mounted, he had quite a bit of money in there for doing underground trenching. Well, won't be any underground trenching, so we reduced his price by the trenching amount, so it would be equivalent to what bidder number 1 was too. So that's where we come up with $107,000, and then his final price after credits would be $64,740.
And as a background for this too, so when we determined the size of the system, we said we wanted a new quote for the rooftop. That's what this is. This represents the rooftop quotes, and that's on the Sunday school hall is where these are located. We also sent them and said we want to get a ground mount bid, and so they provided that with the same requirements. We gave them the location down by the baseball field, and so that is the quote you will see on the ground mount side. And so those were the 2 locations. We said, we want you to provide this amount of system. What does that look like in this location? What does that look like in this location? So that's what's coming up here. And we'll move on to the next one here.
Okay, we looked at that, and I just made that comment, if we're gonna do a rooftop, our roof on the Sunday school hall is pretty well at its life now, so it'd be prudent to replace our roof if we're gonna put that on there. And we got 2 bids on roofing, one for shingles and one for metal roofing, and the bid we got for shingles was $22,679, and the metal roofing was $39,056.
Yeah, and to clarify too, I think when the council originally looked at this, we thought there was like a 3 to 5 year life left on the roof essentially. So within the next 3 to 5 years, we're gonna have to replace the roof regardless of whether we do solar. So this is just, you know, we didn't dig a lot into this. We got some bids for those pieces, but that's something to take into account. And we'll talk a little bit too. I know you guys are gonna have questions about, you know, can the roof support the panels and things like that. So there's different methods of applying it depending on the type of roof. All methods should be fine as far as, you know, supporting things like that. We can get to more questions like that later, but we did get these bids as far as that goes. Another question too, this should not be part of that credit, which is why it's not built into the cost here in the credit. So you're not gonna get a credit for that because it's not the solar project, it's not those pieces. But it would be a separate cost essentially from the project.
Okay, then the ground mount, we looked at basically the same thing from our bidders 1 and bidders 2, and see they're both pretty close to what they bid. A little bit of difference in the kilowatt hours they say they're gonna get. And then those 2, the prices we got from them for installed cost was $113,500 from one bidder and 444,000 from the other bidder. And again, we made the same adjustments on those two to make them come out apples against apples. So we, then with the credits for a ground mounted system, we're looking at 68,100 for the lowest and 86,400 from the other bidder.
Yep, and I don't know if this comes up, there you go, that's on the next slide. I was gonna mention some differences between the two. But like I said, this is based off of the location down by the baseball field, essentially where the pumpkin patch is going in, that general area is kind of where this location is that we picked for the ground mount side based on all the variables, so.
And both of them included in their quote, getting all the permits and going through the variances and everything it takes to get that installed. So they're aware of the Posey County restrictions and all that. And so they've, as part of their bid, they've included that into this price. There, I just put them side by side for you, so you can see the difference between the rooftop and the ground mount, and each one of them's got a low bid and a high bid. As we went through the net cost of the solar installation, the minimum we got was $52,692 for the rooftop, and the maximum we had for that was $64,740. And then on the ground mount, our minimum was $68,100, and the maximum was $86,400. So it's somewhere between $15,000 and $20,000 difference between the roof mount and ground mount.
And much of that distinction is gonna be the boring costs required. So placing it down there, it does require boring going underground, having the wiring and everything going through. That was, I think, the primary difference between the costs there, I believe, Carl?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the savings is gonna be the same on either one, because basically what I looked at when I went through this is then what we're really gonna save is our usage charge. We can't define what it's gonna do for our demand. Hopefully it will reduce our demand, but there's no way of defining that because we don't know what our demand is at nighttime compared to what our demand is at daytime. Summer, you got your air conditioners running at night to keep it cool, but maybe you got them turned down. But anyway, we couldn't define that, so I thought, well, best thing we can do is be conservative, look at our usage. If we do better than that, great. And I'm kind of the mold like the old Dutchman, you know, conservative Dutchman. You can always tell a Dutchman, but you can't tell him much. So that's my problem. So that's where we are. And then looking at the payback for the rooftop, the estimated payback time was 7 years, and the maximum would be 8.5, and then on the ground mount, it went to 9 and 11. But again, that's using the conservative figures there.
And I think that's referring mostly to the increase in utilities expected. So I think we use the 2.5% for this calculation. I think most of the contractors, I think, were using even higher numbers. They expected higher rates, but we dropped.
They used 3.5. And
yeah.
Again, being the Dutchman, I said, oh, we'll go 2.5.
Yeah. So that's the expected payback period for the different systems there.
Right.
And then I don't know if it's on here as far as the life of the system. Expected life of the system, I know you've got it in here, don't you, the warranty and pieces?
Yeah, with the warranty,
Yeah.
The warranty is actually on the panels and the inverters is 12 years, but both of them have an estimated life at 25 years. Mm-hmm. And again, I looked at at 12, 15, and 20. I didn't look at 25 again. I was saying, nah, maybe not.
Yeah.
So,
okay.
So just made a summary here of kind of everything we had. Our current electrical usage for the church and parsonage combined, we have 50,000 kilowatt hours, and our costs are basically $9,200 a year. Our service charges were $300, and that's what we get charged for just for having to serve it. And then the usage charges were $6,958, and the demand charge was $1,921. And then we based everything on that escalation of 2.5% a year. So, our yearly costs, are gonna increase from 9,200 to probably about 11,777 in 10 years and 13,000 in 15. But the next one's, you know, CenterPoint's got that request in now. And that request is gonna go, I think it's 5.5% at the end of this year. Then it compounds again at 3.5% to start in 25. And then in 26, you're gonna compound another 7.5%. So that 2.5% goes out of the window for those first 2 years. And, if that goes through, we'll be paying $13,271 in 10 years and $15,000 in 15 years. So that's pretty, and that's just considering 2.5% after those initial rate changes go. So again, it just says for the purpose of calculation of our savings, we looked at only the usage charges and ignored the demand charges, where we hope to get some more credit there. There's our basic summary of what our cost for solar power to the church of Parsonage would be between $53,000 and $65,000 for a rooftop system, and between $68,000 and $86,000 for a ground mount system. So based on which option is chosen, we'll get 2.5% escalation on our savings as well. So the paybacks run from 7 to 11 years total, depending on which one we pick. So there it tells about the product warranty, and the panels have a 25-year performance warranty, so that's why basically they look at a 25-year life.
It's more of the same, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that one's pretty well the same, except we're looking at the savings, and the second one tell you, if we look at just the warranty period, say everything goes south at the warranty period, in 12 years, we would have saved $46,000 with our cheapest option on the roof mount, and $12,500 for the most expensive option on the ground mount. So minimum savings we're gonna see is be probably $12,000 to $15,000. That's just in a 12-year period. Then looking at the 15-year, you see it goes up to $76,000 and $43,000. And then I looked at a 20-year projected life, and our savings will actually grow to $131,000 and $97,000. So savings can be significant if we get, you know, to the 20 years.
That's it.
Before we go any further, I just got a text. It came from Nolan Vandegrift with Rodders. He said, "Carl, thanks. We didn't have enough chips in the corn last night."
These services aren't recorded, are they? Services aren't recorded, right? They'll never find us.
Yeah, it is.
All right. Okay, we'll go ahead. We'll start with questions. Like I said, you can go ahead and answer there, so we don't need to bring mics around. We'll do our best. And I don't know if you want to bring up my other one. I'll keep this on for now. We may have some questions specific here. All right, go ahead. Sorry. Brenda? Right? He's back there. All right, it is time for questions. Please raise your hand if you have questions. Dan?
Okay, if I got my figures right, on the electric part only of
Yeah.
the parsonage and the church, you're paying, or the church is paying about $18,500, which includes demand and all that.
18.5, are you talking about the kilowatt hour?
No,
Sorry.
18,500 a year.
No,
is-
90.
Is
For the church and parsonage combined, we're about 9,200, 9,200.
Just for the electric, I believe,
Okay.
right?
Just the
That's-
electric.
Yeah.
And then, no, if the solar panels go up, there still will be a demand charge on the parsonage and the church?
Yeah, there would still be a demand charge, but if we tie them together, the thing it is, the way it's added now, it just assumes that the parsonage demand is occurring concurrently with the one at the church.
Right.
And that may not be the case if we're actually, because if we put them on the same meter, they'll all be, there'll be a meter demand, then we'll have what the actual demand is rather than an estimated demand.
So then, it's around the $9,200 approx is what we're trying to save.
Well, that's what we'd like to say, but really what we looked at saving was the usage alone, which is like $6,900 or almost $7,000.
Yeah, 6,900.
And that's what we can say, we know definitely the solar panels will contribute to saving that amount.
Yeah.
And it will possibly help us on the demand as well, but we can't define what that is. Right now, that demand charge is $1,920 a year is what we're paying for demand. You know, we may be able to cut that by, let's say, a third, but that'll only end up being another $600 a year savings for us or something.
Does that
Well, I
answer
was
the question?
trying to define an estimated figure, what we're trying to save.
Yeah, it'd be the usage charges. We kept the demand out. We'd like to say, get some of the demand saved, but the usage is what we know we can use the solar against. And so that's what the calculations on payback and things are based off of. It was the usage charge, the $69.58, and with the escalation in pricing over the years.
And one of the ways to look at the demand is if we have a sunny day when we're in church and we've got sun at that time, we're probably going to reduce that demand charge. If we have a cloudy day, we're all in here, we're using the, maximum power at that time, we're probably not going to save that month on it. So it's a lottery on whether or not you're going to get the extra demand. That's why it wasn't included in the savings.
Why the lottery is saving on the demand charge potentially.
So,
Yeah.
Okay. Just guess and then estimate how much are we trying to save?
Right now, it would be the $69.58.
Yeah,
Okay.
the usage. Yeah. Delvin.
How does a not-for-profit organization use a tax credit?
So there's a specific, they changed the rules for this within the last year or two, essentially allowing not-for-profits to take advantage of some of the solar rebates and things. Essentially at this point, we would pay for it at the higher price, and let me get to that. What you do is you pay and this is just how the credit works as well. You pay all the costs, get the system in place, and the year that is in place, you file a tax return for that year, and which not-for-profits file tax returns to 990s, although I'm learning that we have not been filing 990, which is interesting. You file a tax return, and you have specific forms relating to that project that you file with it, and then the federal government pays you back a rebate, a direct rebate for that. It's just cash payment at that point. So that's how we do it. Yes.
What is the difference in maintenance costs between roof mount and ground mount?
So I don't think we did estimates for that. The warranties cover, that period of time. If something goes wrong in that period of time, it's covered regardless, and so that maintenance is going to be there. If we're handling it depends on a ground mount, right? So ground mount or roof mount. If it's ground mount, there's some things we can probably do, and some of the things the committee looked at is whether or not we should be doing it versus them. So ground mount, we would probably do a lot of our own maintenance unless it's a piece of equipment that breaks down, in which case we probably are bringing in the original contractor. One of these contractors is local. They would definitely be coming in and easy support for that. Roof mount, we basically determined that would have to be contractor doing all that type of thing if it was needed. Again, all breakdowns on equipment and things would be them. General maintenance, and maybe Greg can answer more of that as far as.
We've had our roof mount system for 8 years now, and I have done zero maintenance on it. And we're surrounded by cornfields, so we get dust, we get all the above. The rain washes off the dirt and the grime. Other than that, like Pat said, the equipment issues are all covered under warranty.
Okay. Sure. Anybody else? Sandy?
This may be a silly question because you haven't brought this up. Either regardless of whether it's rooftop or ground mount, the panel will provide energy for the parsonage as well, where they will be separate
That's correct. So all the panels would be if we went the rooftop option, we had them quoted as if it was on the Sunday school hall. That's all that would be needed for both the church and the parsonage, covering both. Ground mount would be the same thing. So the last bid and the intention, what we thought was the best approach, was to try and cover these two buildings. And so any of these systems would cover that, but it was just on the Sunday school hall, yeah, for the located roof mount.
If there's a need in the future for expansion, I assume the ground mount would offer better opportunity than the roof mount.
So the current option on the roof mount covers most of the Sunday school hall. I think there was some extra room potentially for panels, but there's also some room on the kitchen addition and things like that. One thing I'll mention too, as far as another reason why this is one of the better options, our roof is perfectly placed for producing solar, like the angle and everything is really good. But yes, there is potential to extend onto the roof if we need it. Depends on the usage we would need, but it is an option, I believe, to bring in the ground mount as well. Like if we needed a lot more extra production, it just depends on the needs. And we did, like I said, we did quote have this be a little bit extra than what we needed. Is it 110%? I think we did.
102%.
102%. Okay, so not a huge buffer there.
Yeah.
But yes, I think as far as I understand it, you could add additional panels later on in the system. The ground mount would provide. We'd have a lot of space for ground mount, improve a lot of extra energy.
Now, the ground mount obviously offers more room for expansion.
Right.
And that was one reason we made the bidder number one, we increased the size of went to 4 inverters on his system, was because if we did want to expand, we got the capacity with the inverter, and that would take care of that.
We'll go this side. Go ahead, Terry.
So, when you do the, underground, coming from over there, from ground mounts, you will also go underground to get into the side of the basement in here, or panel here, to under the asphalt, correct?
Yeah, you'd have to come inside the building, and they haven't gone as far as scoping out where the inverters and all those would be located. But you'd have to get inside, especially if we decide to connect the parsonage to this meter base, then we're gonna have to bore across the driveway to that other device.
And you're saying that all the solar panels on the rooftop would be just over here?
Yes, it would just be on the Sunday school hall.
Why did the other proposal take all that plus that?
Take all that plus that. Sorry.
It was doing on the rooftop of the parcel.
Right.
And the garage.
Originally, they basically were giving us all the panels that you could possibly have, I think was the original. So a lot of those original quotes we had, this was like everywhere you could put panels to produce as much energy as possible, I think was kind of what the original ones. And so they did provide, so we've had 2 sets of quotes essentially. The first round that provided panels on top of the parsonage, provided panels over here, provided panels everywhere. These bids, we kind of talked about this towards the beginning, but we scaled all that back to basically be what we needed instead of just producing as much solar energy as possible. Yes, that's also true, yes.
Parsonage meter and meter down there, so it was based solely on that meter.
Yeah, he's mentioned the different meters. They were also putting it to the different meters we had. So we have 3 meters. They put panels here for that meter, panels in the garage for that meter, panels on the church for that meter. So that was another reason I think it was quoted that way.
But as far as going in the building, they did, I mean, of course, it's gonna end up a little, but come from over there, over here or down, possibility they can put their switches and everything on the side of the building, they don't have to break through, and tie it in to the bottom of the meter. So then it comes into our normal service that way, or it goes back onto the grid that way. So that's an option they got, that they don't even have to break into the basement.
Yeah, it just depends where the inverters are. If the inverters are inside the building somewhere, then they're gonna have to get out to the meter base.
Yeah.
If it's the ground mount system, more than likely they'll put the inverters at the ground mount system. And then, like Carl said, you've only got one connection to the meter base out there. You connect on the bottom side of the meter and you're done.
Have we looked at the insurance as far as if there's any difference if inverters are inside or outside, and also what the added value if you would have the wherever they are, what our insurance premiums would do, if there's, if that's considered a risk or a benefit?
Yeah, we did, I don't remember the numbers, we did look at the insurance impact. Go ahead.
Insurance, there will be no change in liability insurance, or there'll be just the additional value of the policy if it's on the roof. If it's on the ground mount, it has to be a complete, separate liability and separate, value of that added there. There's no additional liability charge to the church if it's on the roof, just the increase in value of the church.
And that's with the inverters being inside and outside?
Yes.
This might seem silly, but if there is you're talking about how they clean off good in the rain and everything, in the winter, if there's an ice storm, how heavy do they get if they're on the roof? Will the roof withstand that weight?
I went over that with the structural engineer. Yeah, the ice on the panels aren't gonna be any more than the ice on the roof.
Okay.
So they have to design for that ice on the roof. And the guys I talk to, of course, they always qualify that, well, I wouldn't put my stamp on it, but here's my opinion, is that, with the wind loads and the snow loads that they designed for on the roof, that he said, we just neglect this 5 pounds a square foot for these panels. He said it's nothing, especially when you look at the safety factors we gotta add for the snow loads and the wind loads. So basically, snow load, wind load, whether it's on top of the roof or on top of the panels, you're gonna see the same.
Well, I knew that the panels were gonna be heavier on the roof, and I didn't know if snow or ice was on top of that,
Yeah,
how much heavier it would be.
yeah, they've already figured in for any ice load they would have. They said, well, that 5 pounds a square foot for the panels would be negligible. They wouldn't worry about that.
The KWH for the ground mount looks like it was a couple points higher than the roof mount. Does that offset potentially the cost or modeling in any way, or is it just like your annual KWH?
Yeah, I'm not sure why they quoted a couple more panels. It may have been that their frame would fit up better on their frame or something, so I'm not really sure why, they quoted a couple more panels. Bidder number one had to put 2 more panels in. I mean, it's 800 watts, other than just convenience, I don't know why they would've put that in there, but, and the same way with bidder number 2, they did step up the KW just a little bit, but not very much. So I'm not sure why they actually did that.
Is that enough to offset the difference in cost, or is it?
Not really. I mean, the panels and some of the things that compared to the installation cost and everything going with it, it's not gonna make very much difference at all.
Yeah, that probably the most significant difference again was that boring cost, because there's it was a good chunk of that difference between the two. Yeah.
Just to go back, you said you spoke to a structural engineer. I just had a little bit of concern, since we already have a roof structure that, that's already got the dead load that originally wasn't part of the design, and then we'd be adding a significant amount of weight. Have we had someone look at it that's independent of the sales? I don't know if you spoke to, can you explain kind of a little bit what you guys were looking at there and what they said, or if we need to, basically, I'd just like a little bit more information on that.
Yeah. The guy I talked to, that's what he does, is design trusses for roofs and all that. And then that's where I went over with him what the loading was and all that.
So that was the truss weight would take the load, but what I'm more concerned about is what the weight of the building, because the trusses are separately attached to the building. So I understand that the trusses would take it, but since the trusses weren't initially part of the Sunday school hall, have we spoke to anyone about, the implications or anything like that?
I haven't really looked at that, but I would assume that when they added that onto the Sunday school hall, they had to take into consideration what the maximum load would have been on that roof, which would have been with snow load or with wind load and all that. And then would have had to apply another safety factor on top of that, which is usually 5, somewhere in that neighborhood. So, you know, we haven't really looked at, I'm not sure how we would look at that. I don't know that we know what the inside of the walls of the Sunday school hall are. But again, I mean, the guy, he just said, well, you know, 5 pounds a square foot is basically negligible. And then he said, well, look at all the houses out here that's got solar panels on them now. He said none of those were designed with putting solar panels on in mind. And,
Yeah, I get that part. I guess it's just that with the, you know, with it all being together, make me feel more comfortable if we knew for certain.
Looking at that.
And I'm not trying to
Yeah.
negate any
No,
of
it's
your
a good-
research.
it's a good point.
It's just a concern. I just would hate to see us add weight and then 10 years down the road, realize we're, you know, our parapet's coming off or something like that. That's just one of the questions I had.
In conjunction with that, I know that they also mentioned we would have to re-shingle, and one of the options was a metal roof. I'm assuming the metal roof is gonna add more weight as well, so is that insurance?
The metal roof's gonna be lighter.
They're lighter?
Yes.
Okay. So if that is a consideration then as well to help lighten that.
And one of the differences with the metal roof, is the way the panels are mounted on there. With the metal roof, they actually got a clamp that clamps to the ridges of the roofing. So it never penetrates the roof, where the asphalt actually penetrates the roof, but it tries to hit all the roof joists, so they don't go through the roof other than going into the roof joists. And then they basically use the same ceiling system as like people that got rooftop antennas and all that stuff. And, you know, I've talked to half dozen people and nobody I've talked to yet has had a leak. I talked to one of the roofing people and he said the only leak they had a problem with was, he said, well, some jackleg ended up going broke putting solar panels on the roof, but he didn't seal them right. Said that was a mess, but he said that's the only one he's ever had a problem.
There you go, you just touched on it right there. I appreciate the work you guys put in for this, and I think that going with the solar is a no-brainer. You know, whether you put it on the roof or whether you put it on the ground, that's not even a question. We pretty much have to go with that because, the way the rates are gonna increase and everything, it's just viable. And I think you're right, you know, do that, but, now we're gonna have a contractor put the roof on. He's separate from the contractor that's gonna put the solar panels on. If there is a leak, this guy's gonna say, hey, it's this guy's fault.
Right.
And if you go to this guy, he's gonna say, no, it's this guy's fault. So, I think that's something to think about, you know.
Yeah.
As far as whether or not you're gonna put it on the roof or on the ground. But either way, I think you need to go with it, roof or ground.
Okay. Tim?
Is going back to that insurance liability issue, I wasn't sure I heard right. If it's ground mounted, would increase our premiums for liability?
I think both were, right? I think both were gonna increase, but there's an additional charge for the ground mount because it'd be a separate liability from the church itself.
Did they say how an estimated cost?
It's been, not at the time, no.
Get an actual number.
Yeah, and I think at the time we did that, I don't think we knew the total cost or anything of the system yet. I think we had the first quotes, we weren't sure, so that's something we would get better numbers on, yeah. And I think, if I remember correctly, Bob, I think he thought it wouldn't be a huge jump, I think, if it was on the roof side, but it would be larger, I think, if it was on the ground, for sure. Balcony.
Since there's such a difference in what they'll pay us for any that we over-generate and sell it back to us so expensive, is there any way we can store that? That's what the state of California is doing now, and they're
Yeah.
trying to get away with all of it.
Yeah, we actually looked at the storage and for the church here, what the guy recommended would have been 3 what they call Powerwall things, which is a Tesla system to put in. But we were looking at it, the added cost of that compared to what we're storing and putting back, the payback on it wouldn't be quite as good. I mean, there's advantages to having that, because if we had it, then, you know, you could keep the church. One thing that, the one bidder, of course, he likes that idea of putting it in there because it's more for him. He said, well, if we had a bad storm and things got shut down, the church could still have power and it could act as a refuge for people in the community if they needed to for a day or so, or something like that. So that was one of his selling points for it. But as far as payback for us, it would be kind of tough. Now, I mean, if people are interested, one guy said he could set up a visit for us at the St. Joe Veterinarian Clinic out on Cynthiana Road out there by Archer Road. They put in a system that's right really close to what we're looking at wattage wise, and they installed the Powerwall thing. And back earlier this spring, when everybody was out of power for 3 days, they were still operating because they worked off of that. So for them it was beneficial because they were able to keep working. But if anybody's interested in seeing that, he said he could maybe arrange for some of us to go out and look at that system for him. So if you're interested, maybe tell me and I can talk to him.
Any other questions? Remember?
Is the area where the pumpkin patch is that the only?
Pumpkin patch is gone.
No, we looked at several options. So that was one of them we looked at. The other one was obviously back here behind the new cemetery. We looked back and forth on that. There were a lot of concerns and things that came up, and we kind of looked into that, and we kind of set it aside because the cost between those two was going to be fairly similar. Like the boring to try and do that was going to be fairly similar, and that one didn't have as many other issues along with it. And we can go back over some of those if you'd like, but that seemed to be the more tenable option at about the same price. You're trying with it. Go ahead.
Yeah, we actually looked at a lot of options, and we didn't bring them all up here. One option they quoted us was putting canopies on our parking lot, putting it on top of there, which is probably not a bad idea, but the price goes up to almost $200,000 to do that. So it's a significant change.
It was a lot of extra steel, more boring cost, a lot of extra things with the parking lot. So we did look at some of those others. You're talking about the solar. So it's not, when I say the pumpkin patch, it's actually, I think, closer. Yeah, there's a lot of space in that area. It'd be, because you still have to meet certain requirements, I think, as far as being away from the road, things like that. So it's actually closer, I want to say, to the baseball field. But we have, no, we didn't put the image on, did we? Okay. We've got some images we can provide too, kind of where the locations where they quoted us.
The good thing is they're facing the opposite direction from the road. So if they throw from the road, well, I couldn't hit it anymore, so that make any difference.
And they are very resilient panels. They're a plastic, multi-layered material that is made to withstand hailstorms and all the weather. And baseballs.
Yeah.
If you do a ground mount, you have to put a fence around that.
So feel that. I think we determined it. So this, right. The size of our system, we don't have to put in a fence. So that was one of the big hurdles for the ground mount, was the Posey County regulations, ordinances, things like that. The size of our system is small enough that we avoid most of the problems that would come along with that. I think there's a few things we would have to do, but the fencing wasn't in it. Do you remember what are the things we would still have to do? I know it's covered in what the contractor was going to do, but.
Well, the one key one is we have to get consent from the surrounding property owners, because to put it there, well, anywhere we put it on the ground, we're within 100 feet. The rules are that you have to stay 100 feet away from the property line. And you can, the
exemption from that, but everybody around has to sign it, and I forget the circumference that agreed to it, that it's okay if you put them there. But all our locations need that exemption.
Yep.
No,
Not on the roof, just the ground mount requires that,
Yeah.
extra steps. All right, any other questions? Mary Jane? Or repeat it. Go ahead, go ahead.
Go to metal roof, there's no holes in it, so if the solar system, the solar power has to come off of it, it's not gonna hurt the roof at all, correct?
Right, so the question, go ahead.
Price of the roof and that panel. Or we've got the ground mount that we could hold off possibly on. I know you said the roof needs to be replaced, but it doesn't have to be replaced right now.
Yes, so I'll say your question here. So a couple things here. So as far as the metal, with the metal roof, there's no piercing with that at all. If we did, with the ground mount option, so the roof does need to be replaced within the next 3 to 5 years, somewhere in there, so that's gonna be a cost. If we went the ground mount, we could wait on replacing the roof to, extend that life a bit, so there's a time period. And I'll mention too, we're not in a rush necessarily to do this. You don't have to do it. I'm trying to remember the date, but we've got an extended period of time in which to do this because that credit sticks around for another period of time. Unless, of course, politics change and they reverse everything, which that's a possibility. So we're not exactly on a time crunch here. We've got time to wait if we needed, time to build up funds and things like that. But as far as the waiting, we could still wait on a roof system too. We could wait that 3 to 5 years. If we did a ground mount, do the panels immediately, we could do that route. If with the roof mounted system, you would replace the roof first and then you would put the panels on, whichever method you would go with the roof. And yes, on the metal side, you're not piercing, it's hooking to it. If that answers all your questions. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, if you go with metal roof and you do roof application, then panels are not gonna penetrate the roof decking?
That's correct, right?
Now, there's a clamp that they use for that, and, I can show you that, I didn't bring it with me today. It's an aluminum clamp that actually clamps on the ridges of the standing seam roof.
Okay. Other questions?
It's not a question, but since we're the property owner on 2 sides down here, we would have no objection to putting the ground mount panels in.
Thank you. I think you're saving Bob a call there, so I appreciate that. All right.
Does the committee have a recommendation? You guys have done all the research.
Not yet.
Which one?
I think we are providing a recommendation next week though, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll provide it next week. I think we know what we're doing, we wanna make sure of that, but yes, we'll provide a recommendation. We'll provide a recommendation next week.
How are we gonna pay for it?
Cash.
Your bill's a little bigger than mine.
He said he's getting ready to make a big donation.
Yeah. So I will say that when we started the committee, lost my voice somehow there. I did say to the committee that it's not really the committee's concern to pay for it. We were gonna send that to the council and figure that out. From the council discussions, it probably would be a fundraising drive, but we also would be pulling probably from endowment. There's various sources we could do, and there are funds available even in the church right now that we could set aside for that. That would be my expected, but I did tell the committee that they didn't have to necessarily pay for it, just find the best option, so.
Thank you for all your work. Yes.
One thing of it too, is part of, when you get the refund, I mean, it could be, written up kind of as a loan or something if you want to go that way.
Yeah, and I did want to make that distinction too. So we are paying for the full cost up front. We're filing the return and getting that 30% back. I've had thoughts to do about that, which I'll talk to the committee about too, but essentially that money is coming back to the church as a whole thing, and everybody, we've donated, so that's a separate issue to figure out. One thing I did think about, I'm just saying this now, it's coming to me, but if we went ground mount option and got the rebate, you could potentially use some of those funds to pay for the roof, is a thought too, because essentially the money's coming back to us. And I doubt we're just gonna cut checks to everybody back for that rebate, so we'll figure out what to do with that, so, anyway. Any other questions before lunch? Go ahead, Joe.
The last thing that I wanna say before we go is, we wanted to get this information to everybody before our semi-annual meeting, so you had time to consider, think about, and contact any of the team members concerning all of this information that you've received. If you want this presentation, if you want this PowerPoint, let me know. I'll forward that to you. You can have all that information to kind of sift through it, look at it more closely if you want. But we really worked really hard, and I appreciate everybody and then the time that they put into this to try to provide you as much and information and as clearly as possible. We learned that from the first presentation we had when we had a gentleman here, and it was like, we left here more confused about everything than we did anything. So we tried to put it in such a succinct and understandable way that you could have it. And if you want any of it, and if you want to talk to any of the team members, please do so. And like Pat said, and Carl said, we didn't want to come with a recommendation today because we didn't know what questions might come to us after our presentation leading up to next week. There may be a few pieces of clarification that we need to do, just as you brought to us, Chris. So appreciate you giving us about an hour of your time following worship, and thank you.
Yep. Thank you, guys.
Hopefully, everybody got something out of this, you know, and if you got any questions, you can ask, and go ahead and, if you want a copy of all this, go ahead and get it from Jeff. Patrick and I get 8% royalty on it, so, whatever that comes, but,
which will be applied to the project.
yeah. But if you didn't get anything else out of it, after listening to Patrick and I for a long time, you'll have a greater appreciation for how good Jeff is at this, so.
And the whole presentation will be on the YouTube channel as well, so if you wanna go back out there and reiterate all the questions and the presentation materials, it'll be out there.
Yep, and I'll mention too, several people did submit questions to me. I do have those answers too, like we did answer that. That was not part of this. I've got a whole separate thing too. So if you had questions that you sent me didn't get answered, I've got them. So reach out to me and I can, or just after this, I can talk to you about it. So, all right, I'll let you guys go. Thank you very much, guys.